Hi there, and welcome to the Live Vybrant Podcast, where we explore how to live with energy, purpose, and intention. I'm your host, Joshua Haag, a holistic lifestyle, performance, and success coach with a background in professional sports and 2 decades of coaching experience. Each week, I sit down with experts across a multitude of fields, including wellness, finance, and personal growth, to uncover practical strategies that will help you thrive in every area of life. Let's dive in and help you live your most vibrant life. Today's episode is all about wealth. It's that wealth side of things. I am with my wealth management advisor from Edward Jones. This is Ken Quazza. He is basically one of the backbones to my life, and this is his first podcast. I'm so excited to bring him on and get to dive into the wealth side of living a more vibrant life. Ken, welcome to the show.
Look forward to speaking with you here for the next hour of time.
Yeah, good. You better be. For those listening, it might be a little interesting or a different take in terms of a fitness podcast diving into wealth. And I think I need to preface it. I need to kind of build the background for everybody in the fact of I've been training for, with all my experience, about 2 decades. And in those moments, in the training realm, on the training floor, one of the biggest things people stress about is money, is their financial success, is where they're at in life, if they can make it. And let's face it, training, a personal trainer, things like that, it's an auxiliary cost for a lot of people, meaning it's a high expense that sometimes people can't afford. So it stresses them to be spending money on something that they may or may not or should not be doing in the moment, right? So there's a guilt that sometimes people feel. And in turn, they stress about their money. So I wanted to bring Ken in to, start to give you, the listeners, a trusted source that I am fully behind, that I believe in wholeheartedly, and that has helped me personally tremendously over the last couple of years. Because wealth management is a sea of different people, organizations, large companies, individuals. I don't even know where to start. I'm hoping Ken can kind of, with his background, he can tell me a little bit about himself and kind of his build into all of this. I'm hoping he can bring some clarity to at least start for us. So go ahead, Ken. Tell us about yourself, where you come from, and kind of how you got into all this wealth stuff.
Thanks, Josh. I appreciate it. There's a lot to unpack there. So I guess let me start with the pathway that brought me to what I do here with Edward Jones. More or less, I actually started out as a client. I did not have a driving passion growing up to be in the financial advice giving business thing, to be honest with you. I was blessed with the opportunity to be involved in the financial world through my mother. She has an accounting practice here in northern New Jersey, and my first career stop was actually in education. So if anybody here is a young teacher, one thing you're going to realize very quickly is the paycheck is not very thick when you get that paycheck at the end of your 2-week work period. That said, I started moonlighting over at my mother's accounting practice, just doing data entry, basic 1040s, answering the phone, and just trying to support her and make a little bit extra money on the side. Long story short, I was blessed with the opportunity to have a simple IRA, which we sometimes call a 401k junior, as a street lingo for that, through my mother's practice. And as a result, I had the benefit of being exposed to a financial advisor pretty much, I would say, once every 6 months. Now, I was small potatoes, but they would come in and talk to, the bigger participants within the plan and on a semi-regular basis, and just kind of find out how life was going and, what they could do to add some value along the way. So after a few years of doing that, it came up in conversation that, this is something that maybe there's a pathway forward for me within. So long story short, took an interview one day, decided to, press forward with it. They did what was called a day in the life activity, which is basically kind of like a single day taste of what it's like to be a financial advisor. And, I took to it really well. It was not only, enjoyable, but it was fulfilling, right? And that's a big piece of what you have to decide with your career path. So, for me, it was kind of a backdoor way of getting into the advice industry. Now, I've been now here in this advice giving industry this is actually my 7th year now, going into my 8th year. And the amount of progress that I know I've made personally is, I wouldn't even recognize myself 7 years ago. Put it that way, right?
That's
And
awesome.
I think that's part of everybody's journey. I mean, you live, you learn, you go through experiences, you become better for it. It's that simple. Uh, so in terms of the general question, Josh, and where to get started and how to get involved and where does this help you live more vibrantly, I think it really kind of boils down to a very, very, very simple concept. And this is something that original advisor on that simple IRA once told me in my very first meeting. And he said that the first thing you have to know is that money is a tool. If you try to take a monkey wrench to paint a fence, it's not going to work out very well. Likewise, if you try to take a paintbrush to do plumbing, not going to get you very far. So, to directly address the wealth needs of a person, you first have to understand what they define as their needs and their wealth, because it varies, and I think that's one of the biggest lessons that you could take from trying to dip your toe into the water of financial advice. Not everyone has the same goals. Not everyone has the same pathways. Not everyone has the same hurdles they got to step over. But at the end of the day, everyone does have a journey. And to me, the best advice that I can give is find somebody who's willing to listen and paint the picture of your journey with you. Because if you're trying to live their journey or their ideal journey for you, you may not be happy at the end of the day, even if you get there. So, it's truly, to your words, a very, very, very deep pool of resources, just a sea of advice everywhere you go. And certain people are better suited for others. So really the biggest piece of advice is understand that money's a tool and find someone who's willing to do the same job that you're trying to do. And that's where you start.
Sounds a lot like training.
There you go.
There's a bodybuilding coach and there's a bikini coach and there's a football coach. So you got to understand the goal. You have to start there. How do you help someone understand their financial goals?
Well, it's a good question. Most of the time it's through conversation. It's through self-reflection. It's through me shutting up and letting them talk.
Okay.
Most of the time,
which is hard. I know which is hard for you.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. But it's also, again, it's a self-reflection activity, and the coordinated probing of certain questions really does kind of bring to light priorities. Yes, everybody in this industry, regardless of what company you work for, is going to have tools. We call ours our My Priorities quiz. It basically just says, what do you value more, this or this? Okay, what about this or this? And it ranks things for you. But what those tools really are coordinated, thought-provoking questions. So, to use you as an example, Josh, right? When you and I started working together professionally, the question was how to achieve your professional dreams, right? Did we spend even a moment of time talking about planning for college tuition costs?
No,
because it was not relevant, right?
Right.
Our conversations all kind of boiled down around what you wanted to achieve and what your envisionments were. And,
Right.
and the questions I was throwing to your directions then are the same questions that you would expect any advisor to give the people that they're having a conversation with. It's what's relevant to the reason for the conversation, and I don't know that reason unless the person I'm speaking with tells me the reason, and then you start from there. So, it's really just a string of questions and conversations.
Off the top of your head, for someone who's listening to this that doesn't know even what those questions would look like, can you give me one or two? You can make them about me too. It doesn't, if you need an example, it's just give me your top like 2 or 3, just so someone can start to think like a financial advisor for themselves.
So the very first question that I'll ask people pretty much unanimously, and this is the only general question, is if you had to put a list of priorities in order for yourself, like what defines you, who are you, what are those things, what are those priorities? Now you're going to hear some of the more common things. Oh, well, I'm a family first person. I care more about my kids than myself. Or, if you're not talking about someone who's got kids, they kind of know why they're here in the conversation. They say, oh, well, I like what I do, but I want to plan for retirement. I know that I've got to start thinking about me later, not just me now. So more or less, it's just, what are your priorities? Tell me why you're here. I didn't come to your house randomly and knock on your door and say, hey, let's sit down and have a cup of coffee and talk about, what makes
Your money.
you should invite me in, So
Yeah.
you kind of know why they're there to have that conversation. But I start with, what are your priorities? Okay. Beyond that, I then start to ask them, what have you done to this point in time? What experiences do you have? Because what you've gone through and what you've learned often shapes the way that your behavior, transacts in the future. So if I don't understand the behavioral experiences that my clients have had, it's very hard for me to adhere to those experiences and enhance their experiences moving forward. So those are usually the first two things. Okay. When you get into a little bit of a more, fluid conversation and a relationship of understanding, then you start to ask okay, what does your day-to-day cash flow lifestyle look like? How much do you spend versus how much do you bring in? Where do you spend on, your money? What types of things really kind of make up your day-to-day existence? I'll quote actually another person who you may remember, who I had a conversation with not too long ago, AJ Fiore. AJ told me that the way he articulates finances to his team is that he understands that every 2 weeks is the most important day for everybody who works for them. And why is that the case? That's payday.
You get paid.
Right? So yes, everyone's got their goals. Everyone has their desires. Everyone has their dreams that they're chasing. But at the end of the day, if you don't pay your mortgage on the beginning of the month, you got some real problems getting to your dreams,
Right.
So he articulated it as, your greatest responsibility is to your family and yourself every 2 weeks. Okay. So the question becomes, what does that look like?
Right.
Tell me about that. Tell me about what your day-to-day looks like.
Well, I want to backtrack in terms of the mental space. A lot of the people I've helped, a lot of my trainers and team as I've grown Heroic over time, family members, things like that, friends, I'm fortunate enough to be a successful business owner, right? Heroic has done well. And I've gone through the ups and downs of a small business starting with peanuts that grew substantially. With that comes a P&L, comes cost analysis, comes understanding expenses, things like that. I find a lot of people don't even have the slightest grasp of understanding of their finances, whether or not they work for a big company and they just get a paycheck once every 2 weeks, or they're a business owner. It is just, they do not understand the numbers. They do not understand even how to jump off at that point. How can you, or how do you help someone? Like, let's say you're going to sit down with me and we're going through these questions and you're like, okay, I want to know what you've done with your finances up until this point. And they turn around and look at you and they kind of have drool in their mouth and they're like, I get a paycheck. How do you start to coach them through that? Because this podcast is for those trying to learn some tactful ways to jumpstart and live, like I say, a more vibrant life. So I'm thinking of the person who isn't even close to working with a financial advisor. That's why I'm bringing you on. So how do I start there before we move forward?
Very, very simple activity. Write it down.
Okay.
Whatever it is that you do, month to month, write your bills down, right? We call that a back of the napkin budget. Okay. If you can't write your budget down on the back of the napkin,
my bookkeeper would kill me if I started doing a back of the napkin budget.
Well, listen, there's symbolism there, right? Of course, but there's also some reality to that. If you can't turn around and tell me how much money you're spending every month on your mortgage, that's probably where we have to start. If you can't tell me how much you're spending every month on your car payment, that's probably where we have to start. Because how can you make sound decisions if you don't even understand what the question being asked is? So simple action item. Write down your budget. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be, 100% detail based because, I mean, look, utility bills, gas bills, grocery bills, they vary a little bit from month to month.
Mm-hmm.
But you're getting yourself a ballpark idea.
Got
Once
it.
you know that, you compare it to what your income is. And you figure out, do I have positive cash flow or negative cash flow? Now, anybody who passed fifth grade mathematics can figure that one out, And if they can't, pick anybody off the street. They probably can help you figure that one out too. Okay.
Right.
So from there, you've now compartmentalized where your monthly cash flow is coming from and going to. And then that's where the real magic starts to happen, is starting to figure out, okay, well, this is going to here, this is going to go to there. Now, what do we do next?
Putting myself in the seat of someone who's just starting out, regardless of your age, I'm only clearing maybe positive a couple $100 each month, this, that, and the other thing. Financial advisor, that's for people who make way too much money, right? That's for the big dogs, the Goldman Sachses of the world and the hedge fund people, and was it hedge fund? Yeah, hedge fund. So is a financial advisor out of that person, in that situation, my realm? Where's the bar to start? Obviously it's a conversation. That's all it takes is to start. But at what point is it viable to start to work with someone such as yourself?
For me, I operate on what's known as the 50,000 pound phone test. Okay. It's not a number denomination. It's not a minimum. Now you'll hear that that's a reality in this industry, and it is. For the most part, it's got nothing to do with someone saying I can't help you, and everything to do with the fact that that individual probably has a very large client load and really just can't afford to take on more people because of the time in the day is just not there, right?
Right.
But most financial advisors, from my experience, are more interested in whether or not you're going to be coachable than how much money you're bringing to the table. Okay. So to use your example, Josh, let's say someone's got $250 positive coming in the door every single month. Nothing crazy. They're not looking to carry a credit card balance from month to month to month, but at the same time, they're just, they don't have $1,000 a month to invest into something. So, advice isn't just about investing. Right? Sometimes advice is about protecting you from things that you don't even know are coming. So, case in point, right? Local to you, California wildfires. Did that disrupt your business last year?
100%. This year.
Right. Yeah, this year. Look at that.
Yes. 100%.
That disrupted your ability to conduct business status quo. Okay. What was it that saved you from having a complete disruption of the success of your business? An emergency fund, right?
An emergency fund, yeah.
So sometimes that advice that you're going to get from an advisor has nothing to do with physically opening up an account with an advisor where you're picking stocks, bonds, mutual funds, or whatever. Right. That advice is more about you as a person. And in certain situations, like for a first-time investor, maybe you just need to figure out what your target number is for putting money into a savings account.
Right.
And then once you get there, well, now we know we've got protection for you
right.
in the event there's some kind of an abrupt disruption that's unpredicted. And you've already conditioned yourself to start taking $250 and doing something for your later self, not for your present self. So right. Now you just take that $250 and redirect it to something that's more beneficial. So, the question of when to start, in my opinion, that answer is the second you're willing to take coaching, right? Don't wait to a denomination has been accumulated, right? When you're open to the coaching, seek it. It's that simple.
It's amazing as you've been going through all the similarities, and I don't know, those listening to this can maybe see it as well, that all the similarities he's making between financial growth as well as personal growth. He's talking about tracking your numbers like you should be tracking nutrition. He's talking about, are you willing to be coachable? Just like you would, the same conversation would come from an athlete to someone looking to their financial success. I think something I want to hit on, and I've been trying to see if you'll go into it, is, and I think it's been the biggest the biggest shift in terms of my thinking is this concept of being proactive not reactive. And it was something that Ken said to me a couple months ago, maybe a year ago, that has just completely shifted my thought process. And obviously, when people think about investing and the stock market, this big bad wolf that stands there, it's this, yes, future concept. But I think when I say proactive versus reactive, I'm talking about strategy. I'm talking about the way you're viewing your money, right? He said a tool. Ken, can you elaborate on that for me? What you mean by proactive versus reactive, how I can incorporate that into my life? Because I teach this with nutrition. I teach it with planning your workouts in the week. I believe there's a lot of secret sauce into that little statement. So can you unwrap that for me?
Yeah, not a problem. I guess this is about as good of a time as any to make my little side plug and just say, listen, none of this is personal financial advice. Obviously, everyone's got a unique situation.
Disclaimer warning, the big bold words pop up on the screen.
Absolutely. But proactive versus reactive is, from my experience, really the turning point of somebody's mental state for future planning. Okay.
All right.
So, one of the things that and this kind of gave birth to the proactive versus reactive conversation that Josh and I recently had, really, I mean, again, in my world, it has to do with taxes most of the time. It has to do with setting financial goals and making progress, using time as your best friend, yada, 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 yada. But really at its core, proactive versus reactive, in my mind, is showing personal conviction and commitment to doing something, to achieving your goals, being a part of the process, and not just being a part, but also, being the spearhead of your own process, versus taking any path that gets laid in front of you and hoping that you end up at the end of the maze when it's all said and done. Okay. So to me, proactive is finding those little things that you can do before you're forced to do them, and setting yourself up for that success down the road. So in the financial situation, we just talked about accumulating savings, right? What can you do to proactively make sure that you're not having a conversation with a person like me one day about taking distributions from a retirement account because the alternator on your car went, right? So what can I do to prevent a problem from occurring in the future? What can I do to put myself in the right vein to be as best prepared for what I may not even know is coming, versus having to play defense when that occurs to make sure it doesn't sink me? So, proactive versus reactive in the financial world is creation of habits, really. Are you going to positively create habits, or are you going to force yourself to have to, come up with a solution in a pinch if you end up in deeper water than you can swim? It's that simple,
Even the smallest bit of mindset shift in that avenue, in that aspect, really makes a huge dynamic shift in terms of the success that you'll see. And again, the similarities here are polarizing between fitness and financial success. So kind of let that sink in, absorb. For those listening, absorb it into your life. Be proactive in what you do. Think forward. Think about how you can get your ducks in a row before the decision, before the moment of truth comes. I wanted to kind of turn the car a little bit here. Something that's very prevalent, at least in my face, and I'm sure with others, something I've been wrestling with. How do I go about, and when I say investing, I know that was a very broad question. Let me narrow it down. We've got stocks. We've got everything from ETFs to like openly traded things in terms of like big companies, blue chips, for those who may or may not know the buzzword. We've got Bitcoin. We've got real estate. We've got all these different quote unquote vehicles for investment. As a new investor, right? How do I even absorb the amount of information that's out there? Where do I start? Who do I go see? This is just a sea of information. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this, at least this first, and I'll probably do a couple here with you, but this first wealth talk is because it is such a monster to slay and to try and make a decision point. Where do I start? And again, I know we made a joke of it before, and I want to reiterate, disclaimer, none of this is actual financial advice. This is an opinion of my friend Ken talking to me. I want to make sure I reiterate that for you. So go ahead.
It's a great question. And to your point, it is a giant that has to be slayed in order to be able to make the most sound decisions for you. The place that I would recommend that any investor start Okay, and this is kind of breaking that disclaimer immediately, but it's a very general thing. So where I would recommend that every investor start is just in a basic conversation with someone who understands what it is they're actually looking at. Okay, find a trusted individual who does have a little bit of exposure, a little bit of experience. Okay. Then once you have equipped yourself with even the slightest bit of understanding, that's when you start to broach the conversation with someone from the professional world. Okay.
Okay.
Most financial advisors, wealth management advisors like myself will spend a very, in some situations, probably an overbearing amount of time talking about something called risk tolerance. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, risk tolerance refers to what you as an investor are willing to go through in order to try to achieve your goals, right? And you know, in a conversation, we're not going to go into too much depth with this very second, but in a conversation with a financial professional, that will generally lead you down the pathway of, you know, stocks versus bonds versus mutual funds versus ETFs versus closed-end funds versus, you know, annuities versus
the sliding scale that will direct you in a way. Okay.
Correct. So we don't want to take, you know, the next 6 days of your life to talk about everything right now. But it really kind of all boils down to that ability and desire to stomach the ups and downs of the day-to-day market. Okay.
Okay.
Now, I will give you something of content here, Josh, just so that, you know, everybody listening does kind of understand the most elementary breakdown of the difference in the kinds of investments you could be in. Okay. In my opinion, it all boils down to two very simple concepts: ownership and debt. You either are a part owner in a company or you are a lender to a company. Okay. Now, ownership, that's equity, that's stocks, that's, you know, equity-based mutual funds, equity-based ETFs, there's blended things. But anytime you're talking about ownership, you're talking about physically owning stock in something, period. Okay. Anytime you are a lender to a company, because believe it or not, corporations can borrow your money and use it for their own, you know, development purposes. That is what's known as a debt instrument. Everything in physical investing boils down to ownership and debt. Okay. I think that's a good little into the kiddie.
Great. That's great. That's the kiddie pool. Okay. But then what about getting into real estate? What about Bitcoin? There's a lot of talk about how much we can do with Bitcoin. How do we make a choice between those vehicles, like zooming out even more? Because now, you know, you were talking in a specific, you know, route underneath, you know, we'll talk trading, stocks, things like that.
Sure.
Zoom out a little bit more. How do I make a decision between going into something real estate, Bitcoin, other avenues?
All right. So I could talk a little bit more about real estate than I can about the cryptocurrency concept, simply because cryptocurrency, for lack of a better way of saying it, is still a rapidly developing field. Right. Mm-hmm. There are things that I would inevitably say that are assumptive in nature, which is very difficult for me to participate as a fiduciary in the financial services and give opinion-based, you know, advice without data to back it. So I'll talk briefly about cryptocurrencies, but let me start with real estate because that's a little bit easier to discuss. So real estate in a lot of ways is an alternative to both equities and debts.
Okay.
Now, what do we mean by that? Well, generally speaking, when somebody invests in real estate, okay, one of their primary things that they want to try to achieve is, say, rental income. Okay. Well, what is it that a debt instrument, otherwise known as a bond, does for you? Well, a bond, when someone goes out and invests in one, will pay you interest in whatever the prearranged increment amounts and timeframes are. So if I gave $1,000 to the U.S. government and the U.S. government says I'm going to pay you 4% interest, well, then I'm going to make $40 throughout the year. It's that simple. Okay. Real estate is often seen in a similar light. I go out, I buy a house, I buy a condo, I buy an apartment, I find myself a renter. That renter then turns around and pays rent, and less the HOA fees and property taxes and basic maintenance expenses, the difference I get to keep as income, period. right? There's also the equity element. Okay. Nobody goes in to buy Microsoft or Apple for the idea that the dividend flow from Microsoft or Apple is going to sustain them for the passive income lifestyle. It just doesn't produce that much income, right? What people go into Microsoft and Apple for is for the idea that maybe one day it's not going to be $400 and something a share. Speaking to Microsoft, it's going to be $750 a share, $1,000 a share. Maybe I get a stock split. Another conversation for another day. But the idea is to start at a lower value and then it accumulates over time.
Yep.
So real estate brings an element of that into the conversation as well, because someone who understands a real estate market generally knows that there is a principle out there that is pretty absolute, and that's that, the land that we live on is limited. And as long as people still continue to want to have the home ownership dream, there is going to be a capacity issue at some point, which helps drive the value of the dirt that you put your feet on. So the thought is that through the accumulation of additional wealth, generation after generation after generation are going to be willing to pay more and more and more and more and more for the land that you're building your home on, or your commercial property, or whatever the situation is.
Right.
Obviously, that's an oversimplification, right? But the point is that real estate brings both a growth element as well as a cash flow element in most investors' minds. So a lot of times in my industry, what I see is that certain people will lean more towards real estate versus stocks and bonds, and vice versa, right? Some people don't want to play landlord. It's that simple, right? But the people that are willing to, the people that, have that capacity to handle that, sometimes feel more comfortable because they can physically walk up and touch the building that they own. They could physically walk up and put a shovel in the dirt that they own. They can cut down a tree on the land that they own.
Right.
Whereas, if you tried to walk into the Pepsi building because you own Pepsi stock, they'd probably arrest you. So there's a difference there, So ultimately, real estate it's a whole other animal in itself. It's a very, very powerful tool, but real estate is very, very, very much more in depth. It's very much more of a labor of love, a labor of sacrifice, and ultimately, you have to understand what you're going to have to contribute in order to keep real estate going. Okay.
Right.
Now, again, there are other alternatives. There's, REITs and real estate investment trusts, stuff like that.
Yep.
But again, that gets really into the weeds. And for people that are on the foundational level of investing,
it's too much.
That's not a good place to start. Okay. Yep. At least not mentally.
I think realistically, and this was the hope of kind of asking you this, jump off question. You hit the nail on the head, and people understanding the real estate market was a statement that you had said. And that's, I believe, from my eyes, one of the most important parts of getting into as a new, doesn't matter age, but new investor in some sense, whether you're working on a property in real estate, whether you're thinking about Bitcoin, gold and silver, stocks, it's what market do you understand? What are you willing to understand? Like he talks about risk tolerance, and I think there's a massive piece to that. That's understanding knowledge is power. Understanding what's going on. If the stock market is scary, but like he said, you want to touch your house and you see it's right there. Well, that's just as good as doing the stock market in specific ways. Stock market is better in specific ways. There's pluses and minuses to no matter how you go about this, which I think is the important takeaway there. That was good. That was without getting too tactical, because for those listening, you can see how he goes down rabbit holes. I love it. Ken and I spent a lot of time on the phone just talking about finance life, and it tickles my brain. It makes me happy. Before I turn the car a little bit and talk a little bit more personally with you, final notes for you, quick, off the cuff. Someone's jumping in. Give me your quick bullet points for tactile or like tactile points of how can I get started? Where do I go? What do I do? Just as a looking to jump into finance.
Individual who wants to begin financially planning. Yes?
Correct.
Okay. First and foremost, go back to what we said right out of the gate. Understand that money's a tool. If you try to connect that with who you are, you're going to find that is an insatiable goal. Okay. So understand that money's a tool. You got to go into that conversation knowing that. All right. Number two, find somebody you trust. It's very, very hard to sort through the very deep pool of resources, as you alluded to before, Josh, with what's available in the financial services industry. Trust has to be the number one thing, because if you don't have faith in whatever that person across the table or over the phone is telling you, it doesn't matter what they tell you anymore, right? So make sure that whoever you're with, you're comfortable with and you feel trust, okay? And then number three is go in there and understanding what that back of the napkin budget actually looks like. If you don't know that, it's going to be very hard to have meaningful, progressive conversation with what your first goal and how to get there should really be. So those are all very, very easy things to do. Great place to start, and it doesn't take a whole lot of talent or experience to be able to put that together.
Yeah, the back of the napkin budget. I do that with our intake. When I sit down, I do the same concept with someone's body, right? And people often don't think about where they're at today, what got them there. They see this future, but they have no idea that in some concept they understand, but actually written down in front of them what choices they have made up until this point that lead them into that next step. So brilliant, Ken. I love it. Thank you. Tell us a little bit about you outside of finance. What do you do?
So I'm blessed with the opportunity to be very, very much involved in the coaching realm on the athletics level.
Okay.
I'm blessed to have a very athletic daughter who has taken to every sport we've ever shown her to. Presently, it is volleyball, and her primary sport being softball. One of the things that I'm a huge believer in is the multi-sport athlete. At the end of the day, there's such a small fragment of people that make a living out of an ability to hit a ball or put a puck in a net or tackle somebody. So in my opinion, sports are a great way of developing character. It's a great way to get someone's healthy lifestyle started out. So I'm a huge believer in taking every opportunity I can to make sure that my daughter is not addicted to screen time and addicted to running around on a field or working out. Okay.
Brilliant. I don't actually know if you knew this. There's a statistic, and I haven't looked at it recently. The last time I did, it was about 85% of all Olympic athletes play 3 sports through high school. So super, super interesting kind of concept for parents listening. And it's a big question I get often is should I, focus in on baseball because Johnny loves baseball? And the answer is no, right? It trains a 3-dimensional athlete. It gets your daughter, let's say softball's her sport. Let's just say she is. And what position is she in softball?
She's a catcher.
She's a catcher. So big squat position. She's down, needs mobile hips, things like that. Well, do you think she's going to be in that position for volleyball? Yeah. Do you think she's going to be stepping laterally in volleyball a lot? Yeah. She probably doesn't do that a lot in softball, but she needs the ability to. Well, we get this cross-functional training that inevitably happens without ever trying in terms of a multi-sport athlete. So that's brilliant, Ken. I love that. That's so smart.
I'll even give you one more plug, Josh, that you could probably appreciate this. So anybody who is a Chicago White Sox fan will know the name Kyle Teal now. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
I had the privilege of coaching high school football at Mahwah High School and high school baseball at Mahwah High School when Kyle Teal was there. I literally sat there and listened to a conference call with the University of Virginia where Kyle went to school. And the baseball coach at University of Virginia told Kyle right in front of us he does not want him to stop playing football. He does not want him to burn out playing baseball, and he loves the fact that Kyle is going to be getting bigger and stronger and faster and more athletic, and they would be able to utilize those skills at the University of Virginia where he went and played.
I think brilliant. I cannot support that theory, that thought enough. And any coach who tries to limit your young athlete before college is the cutoff, is a fool and does not know what they're talking about. I can tell you as a coach, the only thing you really can't coach in somebody is size. You can get someone faster. You can get someone more athletic. You can teach them how to move differently, but you can't teach someone to be 6'6" or 5'2". Or so if they're playing multiple sports and they're playing positions that are dedicated to their size, everything else is just a skill set and an asset. So try and develop them as much as you can across multiple planes. That's brilliant, Ken. Now, which is your favorite sport to watch, volleyball or softball?
Honestly,
and you coach? Wait, do you coach both?
I do not coach volleyball. My extent of understanding volleyball is get it over the net and don't let it hit the ground. So okay. No, I'm a very, very, I get involved with the softball aspect. This is actually my first year that I did not coach my daughter since the day she picked up a bat and a glove. She went to high school this year. It was a little weird sitting on the outfield fence, not having my opinion matter anymore. But it was also very rewarding to see not just my daughter, but the same group of girls that we've been coaching for years and years, kind of flourish and become their own young adults and figure out how to navigate without myself or the assistant coach who helped me all those years. There backing them from the dugout. So it was a cool experience. It was very lonely. I think I'll get better at it, but this year was a little rough for me.
How old is she? Like what grade is she playing in?
She is 14. She'll be 15 this summer. She had the opportunity to be our varsity third baseman at West Milford High School for a majority of this past season. Mostly because we're still kind of pushing through the last of the COVID years, where you had a lot of kids that dropped sports just because they didn't have them available to them. So she kind of walked into a good situation where there was a real need, and she had to learn real quick because you're playing 18-year-old young women in high school, and she was 14 years old. So time to strap up the boots, kid, and get out there.
So what do you see both coming off as an ex softball coach at this point and a father of a young lady going into high school athletics? What do you see as some of the biggest questions that you faced, as well as some of the biggest problems that you see in their training and their athleticism? Because I just had a wonderful podcast last week. We dove into youth training with Cody Braun, an incredible youth performance coach out here. He works with me. But this is another viewpoint, or especially considering you're on the softball side, as well as you have a young lady where Cody does not. So kind of where's your head at with that? What do you see? What do you see missing? What problems do you want to confront?
So I think the biggest thing that I wrestle with, and this is probably a very common theme among young athletes who are considering the transition to potentially open up the doors to collegiate athletic experience, or beyond even, is there at some point has to be a recognition of whether it's the kid that wants to proceed along that route, or if it's the parent pushing the kid to try and proceed along that route of continued development and greatness. Don't get me wrong. I understand that at 13, 14, 15 years old, a lot of times the lack of experience, lack of exposure, lack of ever having gone through it before does limit the possibilities of someone like my daughter from even knowing what's available, right? Like I would not have, or she would not have known that it's important for us, because she does want to try to play college softball. We would never have known that she needs to be going out and participating in showcases and playing on club level travel softball teams, things that put her in a spot where she's getting the highest level coaching, playing against better competition, and at the same time putting herself in a spot to have exposure. Okay. But one of the reoccurring themes that we see over and over and over and over is that a lot of times it's not the kid's desire to be going through all that. And it is quite a commitment. I mean, my daughter played 90 softball games last year. That's a lot. Spread out over the course of about 9 months. So it wasn't like she was playing every single day all year round. Again, I agree with you wholeheartedly. She's got to do other things. But when you are in the middle of, say the very end of the high school softball season and it overlaps with summer club season, they are playing every single day. There is no doubt about it, right? And the performance of an athlete, regardless of what sport they are in, is going to be hand in hand with their desire to be there that day and put everything they have on that field. And if you're the one forcing that child to do that and they don't want to do it, all that's going to happen is you're going to start getting frustrated because that kid can perform better than they are. Mm-hmm. So to me, one of the biggest struggles, one of the biggest points of wrestling internally as a parent and as a coach is understanding if this is what I want her to do versus is this what she wants her to do.
How often do you have that check-in conversation? How often do you talk to her and reestablish that line?
I would love to say it's say weekly or monthly, but it's more like as needed basis. Okay, so case in point, my conversation with you this past winter, Josh, about trying to develop functional strength training activities, things that are going to help develop, the ability to move with power, move with core strength, move with translatable benefit to the field, led to me getting her involved with a strength conditioning and core training individual, local to where I live here in New Jersey. And my concession to my daughter was that, I want her to take the interview with the gentleman. She will then get to decide after a couple of workouts if this is something that she wants to do. And I'll go with whatever she says. Because at the end of the day, it's my daughter's decision. She's the one that's going to give the 50 minutes 2 or 3 times a week to train. So, I'm not going to put my daughter into indentured servitude for the idea that she can now start doing 25 push-ups,
Right.
Now
he's specifically talking, seeing an outside coach on top of the actual softball. I'm speaking specifically to those, and I see it time and time again with the pushback of, there's a volleyball tournament in Phoenix and we've got to go there, but the parents don't really want to cart themselves there, but the girls kind of do, but they kind of don't. It's this like gray area. I can say from experience, as someone who has mentored a lot of different parents through, it's a really weird gray area. I highly recommend every season you have a sit down conversation with your son or daughter about their sport. Every season with every sport, period. And you have a real talk of, are we making this commitment? And the word that has to come out is commitment to themselves and to their team. That is the most important thing that I can give you, because what we end up teaching the youth and the young athletes is that it's okay to bail, quit, give up, things like that. It doesn't matter if they're going to play in college or not. It doesn't matter if they're the best libero that the team has ever seen. That's a back row specialist. But what does matter is that they're learning to stick to a decision. They're learning to make a decision and make it promptly. You can give them time to reflect on it, but I firmly believe that every single person who listens to this in your household needs to adopt the principle that if we're committing to X sport for this season, we are doing it unless you are hurt or throwing up, right? Unless you break your leg, then that's an out, right? And hopefully you break your leg on the field and it's not that bad. But I see it, especially out here. There's this wishy-washy, and parents are trying to be best friends with their kids, and they don't want their kid to be going through like a tough time. And at the same time, the parents don't really want to be carting their people all over the place. It's hard, man. It's a commitment from the whole team. So if mom and dad are making that commitment and they're going to bend over backwards because it is a haul to make it to 90 games, the son or daughter needs to understand that they're making this commitment as well. What do you do? What do you do for your daughter when she doesn't want to go to practice? Or is she one of those unicorns that's like, my pads are on an hour and a half beforehand?
I have a 14 or 15-year-old daughter, so if anybody's had a 14, 15-year-old daughter hears this, you'll understand exactly what I'm saying when I say there is literally nothing predictable about her in any way, shape, or form. So I couldn't tell you that she's one of those girls that gets to practice an hour and a half early and is sitting there waiting to make sure that she's on time. No, she's a 15-year-old girl. She's going to go to her own beat of her own drum. But what I will say is that normally at that point, I usually try to give her a little bit of a pep talk. Okay. One of the things that I think, and you kind of alluded to this just a moment ago, Josh, one of the things that I think is really, really, really important about sports is the idea that it is going to form you into who you are. And I think when we translate sports to real life as an adult, you find that the idea of competition being installed in a young human very, very early in life in a healthy way is going to translate big time when they become an adult. Because when I interview someone to come work in my office, I'm not hiring 2, 3, 4 people. I'm hiring one. I may interview 7, 10, 12, however many it takes, but I'm picking one. So if that individual shows any lack of commitment in whatever way, shape, or form, to use your term, shows any wavering of spirit, well, that really quickly moves them down on my list. Okay, because if I know that I'm going to be here every single day, and Anne Marie, my office support staff, is going to be here every single day, and they're going to be busting their tail, I can't turn around and put another member into that team that is going to be the weak link in the chain and cause it to break. Sports, to me, again, it's not about playing on Sunday night baseball. It's not about, returning a kickoff for a touchdown. It's not about hitting a three-pointer in a playoff game or a one-timer in the Stanley Cup. It's about developing an understanding of competition within yourself, but also scaling it to the world around you, because you're playing against other athletes, other teams. No one goes on the field to lose. That's translatable to real life. So, that's the kind of thing that I turn around and I try to convey to my daughter in our little pep talks. And it's done in much less wording, of course. It's, hey, listen, I understand sometimes today you don't want to get up and go out and run the bases. You don't want to go out and take the 50 swings off the tee in the backyard or go to practice. Or I know it's 95 degrees out, but kid, both teams are playing in it, It turns into, here's a test of your fortitude. What do you have to do to get yourself up to make sure you're not letting your team down? Usually gets her going, and like all 15-year-olds, you throw them into the fire and suddenly it's like nothing was ever wrong. But, a little pep talk, just be there and be supportive. It's that simple.
All right. So love it with the, sports in terms of your youth, in terms of getting them up and running. But what about you? Where are you at? What couple things have been burning questions in your mind for your own health? As a father, as a hardworking investment warhorse. I think that's a great way to describe you. I always love to have a little bit of a segment where I just answer some questions. And it's, I am a firm believer of the theory that if you have the question, someone else is sitting there going, oh, I was thinking about that. So where are you at? What's the top couple burning questions in your mind about your own health and wellness?
Well, I think, and this is probably very, very common with anybody who's a parent and juggling a lot of things, not to mention also working, in order to pay the bills. It's realistically, where in the day, where in the week can you actually take a couple of minutes to take care of yourself, right? And that, because it always goes to the back burner, right? Anybody who has kids and has a strong family structure understands they're going to do anything they can for the kids. And most of the time for me, that leads me to sitting there at 9:30, 9:45 at night, realizing, man, I look at my step count. I only took 4,000 steps today. My God, this isn't good.
Right. So it's where to build that in, and you're not going to like the answer to this. And it's really funny until you get to the other side. And realistically, you have to build an hour in for yourself. Once or twice a week. You can't tell me that in, 156 hours in a week? Is it 156? 156 hours. I think it is. 156 hours in a week. You can't find me two for you. And I'll see it a lot of the times with mothers where they give everything to their child. And I believe it at some level becomes a scapegoat thing. They don't want to take ownership and accountability of their own self and body. And I'm not meaning to be harsh, but it's, oh, I do everything for them. And it's like a martyr syndrome. I'm sorry. No, yourself is included in that. How can you pour from a cup half empty, right? You need to fill yourself. And what's funny is as someone starts to understand that, and they take a little bit of time for themselves, they work out, they maybe do some reading or a little self-development, and they put just a little bit of energy back into themselves, they end up being more, and I'll plug the name, vibrant for their family, for their significant other, for their kids. They're at the sporting event feeling alive while they're there versus just droning through it because they're exhausted. It's a contradictory theory, but I can tell you it works. So the real question to you, the coaching point would be, when can you force an hour? Just start with one. And maybe it's just a walk while you take calls with clients. Great. And then from there, you build it out into, now the hope is 3 days a week, you get a workout in, or you're 2 days a week, you're working out and you have a little bit of reading time. I just, unfortunately, have been around the block enough to know that it is just an excuse versus you actually don't have 2 hours in the course of a week. So unfortunately, it's a harsh answer, but it's the truth.
No, and you're right. It's definitely the truth. And to your point, I feel that looking at a reflective position on, say, like what I did yesterday, there were certainly, maybe not even an hour, maybe there was 2 half-hour blocks of time that have gone and taken 3 or 4 walks around, 3 or 4 laps around my building. 100%. And I guess that kind of leads to the next question is, you brought up the idea of like what happens when like my daughter needs a little, pep talk. Well, what happens when or where do I go when I need someone to kick me in the ass?
Hi, my name's Josh. I'm a professional ass kicker. No, I get that. It's tough. And a lot of the times, fortunately, just like you are with the finances of someone, I can imagine how diverse the mindsets are that people walk into your office with of, please help me. My life is not where I want it to be. I get the same exact concept when it comes to help me. My body and the way I feel is not where I want it to be. And it's just a sea of realistically excuses and lack thereof trying, right? How hard is it to do a back of the napkin expense sheet? It's not hard. It's just you have to do it. Same thing happens with me and eating right or going for a walk or things like that. It's not hard. It's just you physically have to like put effort to it. And realistically, you become a mirror. And it's the same thing with a coach, with someone like myself or a coach in sports, is you're a mirror. My job is to reflect what you're giving me and show you your inadequacies, your weaknesses. And it's a wonderful position to be in, but it's hard, right? Like you just said, who do I go to? Especially as an adult where people are relying on you. That's where someone like Ken, a coach like myself, is so valuable. So I highly recommend it. If coaches have coaches, everyone listening to this should have some form of a coach or mentor in their life. Yeah, it's big. I also, this is a good one for you. I heard this the other day. Doing 8 to 10 body weight squats every half an hour-ish, give or take a little bit of time, but about a half an hour throughout the day is more effective and does more for you, for your body, than a half an hour walk. So literally stand up throughout the day when you're about waiting for the fax machine that's behind you, do 8 to 10 squats, and then keep going through your day. I don't know. I haven't tried it, but that's a little fun fact.
must be a California thing, because I had a client in California call me and say that one of the things that she tried to live by was that every single day she was going to do however many body squats her age was, because body squats are the best thing that she could do for herself. So
I love that. That's a great one.
57, she's going to do 57 body squats, and if she's got to do it in increments of 10, 10, 10, 10, and 7, fine. But that was going to be her thing.
That's amazing. Well, I want to make friends with her. She's my kind of girl. So before we wrap up, anything else, kind of burning questions, anything big in your mind right now?
No, I mean, I think that, especially with the way that my brain is wired, and to your point, everyone's brain's wired a little bit differently. But the big thing with me is I'm very black and white. I'm a data guy, right? I need to have things that are formally written out, formally placed in front of me. Yeah, we can ramble, we can go down rabbit holes, but when it comes time to physically putting the rubber on the road, there's got to be something measurable behind it. Do you find that there's any benefit or any system in place for measurement that is a little bit easier to start with as someone who's, admittedly needs to start doing 10 squats every 30, 45 minutes? Is there like some kind of like a measuring metric that you recommend for your clients?
A measuring metric as in terms of like body stats, or in terms of like a quota?
Yeah, say a quota, right? Like a quota. I mean, I think like for me, case in point, like I'm less concerned about my weight and more concerned about my feel. I want to feel like when I go out to coach, I can run around on the bases with the girls and be part of it all, So some kind of a quota system. Like, is there something that you recommend to your clients?
There's absolutely no science behind it. And it was really funny. Another study that I just read about the 10,000 steps thing, where it's during COVID, they came out with the 10,000 steps metric, and it was just off of the cuff. There is no major empirical evidence behind specifically 10,000 steps that you must get to live a successful, healthy life. However, there's a lot of good concepts behind setting a bar and making sure you're hitting that bar. And I think it's very relative to you. One of my hardest working young ladies, and hopefully she listens to this at some point because she'll love that I gave her a plug. She hits 7,500 steps. That's her thing. She's 59. She's just about to turn 60. But she hits 7,500. She's also 5'1". So for her to walk 7,500 steps, it's much harder, right? In terms of little legs. Well, it's actually relative. But technically, I honestly would just pick one or two things as your metric. And steps is always a great bar because it puts into perspective of, I have not actually physically moved my body. If I said you have to go work out once today and get your heart rate above, zone 2, which would put you at like 65, 70%, your theoretical, VO2 max, range, blah, blah. It's just throwing buzzwords into the pot, and you don't understand it. It's not like an external cue. It's not something you can tangibly grasp. But 10,000 steps is something that you can say, I did or did not do this, and it's just clean cut. So I would start there. Or I'm going to do 10 squats every half an hour. That's a metric. And I would pick something that's relative to you, your lifestyle, where you're at. If it's freezing outside, maybe you're not going to go outside. Maybe I'm going to go up and down the flights of steps. It's kind of the base level for it. And then from there, it would be some form of, like, I would call it like a sweat equity goal, that I'm going to break a sweat twice a week. Doesn't matter what it is, because that's going to keep it in perspective in terms of your overall exertion versus I'm going to hit this specific heart rate goal. Well, maybe one day you feel like crap, right? Maybe you just got to mosey outside in a sweatshirt and you're sweating. Other days you want to go for a run. Great. But that would be kind of the next level. So first, just hit a movement goal for the day. And then secondly, then a sweat goal of some form. Obviously, at the end of the day, strength training is always the best that you can do in terms of time for results, time for return on investment. I also highly recommend a wearable of some form, like an Apple Watch. I am a firm believer in the Whoop. I have been since day one. The Oura Ring is good. Fitbit, something to give you quantitative feedback. I want data. All of my personal clients wear a Whoop. I want data because it gives me a real, back and napkin feedback of whether or not you're sitting on your butt all day, or did you move? Did you sleep? A big part of Vybrant, our new company, is really taking a deeper dive into sleep specifically. So maybe that's where you start in terms of feeling better, is conquering recovery. And then in turn, you're going to have more energy through the day to run around with the girls. And then you're going to have more energy to give me an extra hour of exercise twice a week. And that's kind of my method in terms of the evolution of my headspace. Is most people, that's where they actually take from. They steal from the sleep pot to support everything else. And the problem is that's actually the biggest thing that is taking away from your ability to tolerate stress. It's increasing your pain tolerance, or decreasing your pain tolerance, meaning you're feeling more. Your nutrition, your hunger sensations go down. Fix sleep, fix a majority of your life. It's just a different way of thinking. That's all.
The first place you borrow from when you have to figure out how to add an extra half hour to your day.
Yep. Well, listen, as I wrap up here, I like to ask one final question, and it's, what are you doing in your daily life to live more vibrant? And what are one or two coaching pieces that you could give someone listening to this who just wants to keep going after their day and get a little bit better, to live more vibrant?
My challenge to myself a couple of years ago, and this is something that I do try to live by on a very regular basis, is I try to plan out the financial piece of my life minimum 6 to 12 months in advance to the best of my ability. It's never perfect, but I find myself to remove that as a stressor, which is something that is within my control, right? There's certain things in life you can control, certain things you cannot control. I cannot control if I'm going to run over a screw in the parking lot and I need to go get new tires, but I can certainly prepare to have a little bit extra money sitting in that savings account in the event that does happen. And I can quantify how much those tires are going to cost. So for me, one of the biggest stress relievers has been future planning, being proactive, to use your terminology from before. In terms of coaching point, right, I would say the best thing that anyone can do is understand the game that they're playing. Don't try to make it into more than it is. Simplify things. And once again, control what you can control. If you can predict a certain quantifiable thing, well, come up with a strategy to get to that quantifiable number. And then, don't overstress yourself. Don't bring yourself down if you have a disruption, right? There's a concept called Murphy's Law. We all know Murphy's Law. Every once in a while in life, you get murphed. It's that simple.
Yeah.
Well, what are you going to do about it, right? Are you going to sit there and pout and go into your own domiciled bedroom and wish that the world would turn off, or do you just do one little thing to take one step forward and put yourself back in a situation where you're going to be progressing? So control what you can control. It's that simple.
That's brilliant. Well, Ken, where can we find you? And more specifically, how can I get in touch with you if I'm listening to this and loved what you've said and want to jump off and at least have a conversation with you? How do I go about that path?
Pretty simple. We've got a bunch of different ways to get in contact with me if there's anything of value that you think a conversation might lead to. Got a phone number, 973-962-2227. Got an email address. My name, Kenneth, Kenneth, ken.quazza, Quazza, at edwardjones.com. I also got a Edward Jones website. So if you just go to Google and type in Edward Jones, Kenneth Quazza, you'll find my website, Facebook, LinkedIn. It's all my name. Pretty easy to find me. I don't hide under a rock.
Perfect. And I can't stress this enough. Ken has done wonders for me in terms of my growth and development over the last couple of years. And, consider this a little bit of a plug. If you're on the fence, if you're scared about money, if you just need to talk to somebody to maybe help move the ball forward 1 yard in your own mind, right? Ken is the man. I swear by him, and he will be stuck with me until he dies or I die. One of the two. Awesome, man. I love you, buddy. Thank you so much for coming on to this.
I appreciate the invite, Josh. As you mentioned, before, you were the first person to ever invite me on a podcast, and I was really excited.
You did great. You did great. Well, thank you, Ken. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and we'll talk soon. Okay.
Thanks, man. You enjoy yourself too, Josh.